Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra Sukhina Santu, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet, Sarvastaratu Durgani, Sarvo Bhadrani Pashyatu, Sarvas Sadbuddhimapnotu, Sarvas Sarvatra Nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Mayedhi Rudrayatte Takshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Last week, in verse number 5, we saw the means, the qualities that we need to cultivate in order to reach what Krishna called is as Padam Avyayam, that immutable goal. So the verse that we will begin with today, verse number 6, describes that goal. So let's chant together. Na tad bhasayate suryo na shashanko na pavakaha yad gatva na nivartante tadhama paramam mama. The sun does not illuminate, nor the moon, nor the fire. That is my supreme state, reaching which they do not return. So when we speak about enlightenment, when we speak about reaching God, when we speak about reaching the goal, where exactly is that goal? Is that goal a place to be reached? Is that goal an experience to be had? So what does reaching the goal really mean? What does realizing God really mean? Our experience in life that we know is that the solar system of which we are a part, the planet on which we reside, receives its primary source of light is the sun. And what these words begin by saying is that that goal cannot be illumined by the sun. Normally we see here, when there is no sun at night, our source of light, of course, besides electricity, of course, is the moon. When there is no moon, on an Amavasya night, on a new moon night, we light a fire. What happens when there is neither the sun, nor the moon, nor the fire? What becomes then the source of light for us? And interestingly, an answer that might not be so obvious is speech. Sometimes you will see that, let's say there is a power outage, there's complete darkness, and you have gone someplace and there's nothing, there is no one has a flashlight, and so you are afraid to move, you don't know what's ahead. And then maybe a person who is familiar with that area, that person can then call out and say, be careful, there is a step here. So in that darkness, speech or sound can show us the way. It's not as clear as the light, but that's the best in that situation when there is no sun, there is no moon, there is no fire, there is nothing else. what if there is no speech either? What is the source, primary source of light? And what the Upanishads and the Gita say, that primary source of light is our own consciousness. Even the sun is not the primary source of light. Even the sun depends on our consciousness. Think about it this way. If you are fast asleep, if you are not conscious of this world, waking world, even if it's morning, even if the sun has come up, and you are not conscious of it because you are asleep, that light of the sun cannot help you. So even for the light of the sun to become effective, you will have to be conscious of the sun. So the light of the sun is dependent on your consciousness to be able to do its work. And of course, if that's the case with the sun, it's much more true with moon and fire and every other source of light. Now, what does the light of consciousness depend on? And it doesn't depend on anything. Now you know you exist. Your own existence, you are aware of your own existence. You don't need to look at yourself to find out whether you are existing or not. You can close your eyes, you still know you exist. So our own existence, awareness of our own selves does not depend on any of the senses, doesn't depend on anything. That's always there. And so reaching that supreme state really means being in that state of complete awareness. And that state of awareness does not depend on the sun, does not depend on the moon, and so on. And then this verse says, reaching which they do not return. So once we are able to abide in that state of consciousness, there is no coming back. Now, coming back where? So there are two or three points that need to be kept in mind here. Aren't we conscious now? Of course we are conscious. So what is the difference then of being in that state of consciousness then and our consciousness now? Right now we are conscious beings, but our consciousness is a consciousness of objects, consciousness of things outside of us. So I'm conscious of people around me, I'm conscious of the world, I'm conscious of the wall, I'm conscious of everything. So there is consciousness in me, but this consciousness is of something, consciousness of the objects. Does consciousness need objects in order to exist? Now the sun illumines the planet Earth. Does the sun need the planet Earth for its light? In other words, even if the planet were to be completely destroyed and the sun would say, well, there is nothing now for me to illumine, so I can't survive. No, the sun will continue to be its own self, whether or not the earth exists. So yes, we are conscious beings, but our consciousness does not depend on the world. Even if the world did not exist, we would still be conscious. What would we be conscious of if there were no objects around us? Now that is our true nature of objectless consciousness. In other words, think about it this way. If you were a source of light, but if you are being a source of light depended on only the objects that you could see. For instance, now, let's think about it this way. Just imagine a flashlight, for instance. A flashlight being the primary source of light. It's not. It's dependent on many things. But just for this, to give an example, let's say a flashlight is a primary source of light. So a flashlight would know, but I'm able to see everyone. So let's say I'm flashlight, okay? I'm the flashlight. So with my light, I'm able to see everyone. But what if I throw the light and there is nothing to see? Would the flashlight still exist? Because the flashlight is always distracted by the objects that the light shows, the flashlight does not have a chance to know itself because it's always seeing somebody else. The only chance the flashlight would have is when everything disappears, then the flashlight would have a chance to know itself as the light. Now that's our present problem. That we are conscious of the world, we are conscious of everything, but the very fact that there are these other things does not give me a chance to know the consciousness itself. Which is what we try to do in meditation, is try to eliminate as many objects as possible. And sometimes, or oftentimes, it usually takes the form of meditating on a specific form. Usually that's the form in which you are able to think of your spiritual ideal, your Ishta. So instead of becoming aware of many, thousands of different forms, we limit it to just one form. Instead of being aware of hundreds of sounds, we limit it to just one sound, the sound of your mantra, the sound of your prayer. So we have already now limited our consciousness to one form, one sound. And because this form and this sound is special, it's connected with the divine, a time comes when this same form then kind of melts into formlessness. This sound takes me to that state beyond sound. The name takes me to the state which is beyond name. That's when all the objects vanish, objects disappear. There are no forms, no sounds, nothing. And then I have a chance to know that I'm that light of awareness. So that is the supreme state, when I'm not just a conscious being aware of other beings, but I am that consciousness myself. Sometimes people experience and think about spiritual experience as seeing some divine visions, which is good, which is a fairly advanced stage, that you are able to have a vision of some spiritual beings or a deity or some higher thing, which is great. But nevertheless, it's still, you are seeing an object. It's still a divine object, but it's still an object. According to Vedanta, the highest spiritual experience would be not that with that light you are seeing something, but that you know that you are that light yourself. So the goal is not to see something else, but to know that I am that light. And that light has no boundaries. You cannot bind any light. Well, you can cover it, which is exactly what has happened now. The light of consciousness within us is infinite. But now we have kind of put a boundary to it with our mind, ego, body. But that light of consciousness is so powerful that even these boundaries cannot hide it completely. And so that light percolates through the layer of the body and mind, making us think that the body is conscious, that the mind is conscious. But that consciousness doesn't belong to the body. It's only just seeping through. The real consciousness, the spirit, is within. So that state which is of reaching is really that state of that pure consciousness. Once we reach that, then there is no coming back to the world of objects. Now, what is the problem in coming back to the world of objects? The problem is only this. The moment we enter into the realm of material world, material nature, that's bound by laws, material laws. And those laws are essentially that everything that is material is perishable, that everything that has a certain form will at some point get deformed. Everything that is a result of some kind of a composition will at some point end up in decomposition. So long as we get tied up into the world of forms and names and sounds, and that's a world of limitations. And then, isn't that the basic problem of our life? Death, mortality, which is really a form, the form of the body disappearing, disintegrating. Pain, sorrow, misery, suffering. Now, all of these things can go away once I know I'm that pure consciousness. That so long as we cling to the forms and sounds and names, cling to the perishable things of this world, we cannot reach that light. So that's what Krishna is mentioning here. Now, a doubt is possible at this stage, and that is, what happens when we become free from those forms and sounds and names? Won't we again get those names, forms and sounds again? We do actually. See, when we are fast asleep, in deep sleep, all the forms, sounds, names, everything goes away. And yet we come back next morning, again all the forms, sounds and names, everything returns when we wake up. There is the theory of cosmic dissolution cycle. So just like daily we fall asleep and all the names and forms and sounds disappear, what happens when this entire creation, people speak about, nowadays we speak about Big Bang, that things were very kind of subtle, and then kind of this evolution and everything, this gross universe of multifarious forms came in. And it's just as possible that at some time in future, the same gross visible universe will once again return back to its finer, subtler forms. And that is in Sanskrit sometime, that's called Pralaya Maharaja, a state of dissolution, when everything, the whole nature then goes back, so to speak, to the original primal state. Now at that state, some of the scriptures mention that we become one with the Lord. Everything is gone, all forms have disappeared, even in the cosmic scale. So won't we come back after that? Then we don't have to do any spiritual practice. Just wait until the whole universe, the Pralaya takes place, and then you are free. And Krishna says, no. When that kind of a dissolution takes place, once again, when the whole creation, the second cycle begins, once again we'll come back. And that is what is described in the next few verses. Let's read verse number 7. Mamaivamsho jiva loke jiva bhutas sanatanaha manashashthani indriyani prakritisthani karshati. Verily, a part of myself, having become this eternal embodied soul, draws to this world of beings the senses with the mind as the sixth, which rest in nature, Prakriti. So what Krishna is saying here is this, that when a dissolution takes place, yes, it's true, everything gets merged in the Lord, but not simply in the Lord. There is this nature. The nature still exists. The material nature still exists, but it is there in a very sukshma, very, very fine form. So all of this goes back into it. And when the second cycle begins, that which was subtle will become gross again. It's a little bit like sometimes falling asleep is also considered a kind of dissolution. In fact, in Sanskrit, they use the word nitya pralaya. It's a daily dissolution. Because, what does falling asleep mean? Falling asleep means all these forms, all the sounds, all the people we know, everything that we consider our own, just disappears. Because we are more or less sure that next morning everything is going to come back, we are not afraid to fall asleep. Otherwise, if there was no guarantee, because listen, when you are asleep, everything is gone, nothing remains. And how come after all these forms, relationships, friends, family, everything disappears in deep sleep? Next morning, when we wake up, we are still, everything that had disappeared, had not really disappeared. Because, think about it this way. Now, a lot of storage occurs on the cloud. A lot of people now, it's considered much safer in many ways to save your documents, everything in the cloud. Because what if your hard drive dies? Then keeping things in a cloud are safe. Now, but when you store your files locally, your files are there. They will not going to get mixed up with anybody else's files. But now when you put it in the cloud, it's not just your files. There are like a million. If you put it in the Dropbox, they have several million subscribers. So all of their files are there, and your file is among those millions and billions. And by this time, you are fairly confident that even if you store your files in Dropbox, even if they are in the midst of several other billions of other files which are not yours, next time when you want to access it or download it, you're going to get your files back and not somebody else's files. Which is what then gives us confidence, yes, we can store it there. Because if you're not confident of getting your own stuff back, you will hesitate to put it. Or even if you put stuff in storage, you need to be sure that whenever you need it, you're going to get it back. That's exactly what's happening here. You can kind of say that when we fall asleep, all of the things that we are connected with in this world are kind of kept in some cloud storage, marked. There are tags. There's the metadata which connects it with you, so that when you wake up, your things come back to you and not anything else. Just imagine if we woke up in the morning and found a whole new family and new sets, it will be very confusing. So this is what Krishna is pointing out here, that it's this verily a part of myself. So what is a jiva? Jiva is nothing but the divine being who has forgotten that I am divine. And then not only have I forgotten I am divine, one of the first thing that has happened as a result of forgetting, I have forgotten that I am infinite. I have made myself finite. So I have become kind of a part of myself. So jiva is nothing but that infinite being, but a jiva who is forgotten I am infinite. And so that jiva then, who becomes the embodied soul, a soul which is holding on to a limitation, to a body. And how does this embodied soul, a jiva, connect with the world around through the senses and the mind. That's our connection. I wouldn't be able to see anything in this world if I didn't have the sense of perception. I wouldn't be able to hear any sound if I didn't have the sense of hearing. So our senses and our mind are extremely important for us to have knowledge of the world. So this limited being uses the senses to be in touch with the world, and that rests in nature, the Prakriti. And sometimes the Prakriti can become very subtle, in which case that is the state of deep sleep, and sometimes it becomes very gross when that is the state of waking. One more point. So what does Krishna mean when he said in verse 6 that they do not return? So who are those who return and who are those that do not return? Now those who are not, who have become one with that light of consciousness, they no longer need the senses, they no longer need the mind. They do not come. There is no need for them. But the rest of us who are still have our senses and the mind and still cling to them, even after these daily dissolution in sleep and that cosmic dissolution that may occur once every billion, trillion years, we will still come back in next cycle until we realize God. Verse number 8. Shariram yadavapnoti yachapyutkramati ishvaraha grihitvaitani sanyati vayurgandha nivashayat. When the Master Soul acquires a body, he takes these, the six referred to above, from the one he leaves, even as the breeze carries odors from their seats and attains the new body. So it's a very important verse and very visually helpful. So what happens when a person dies? And normally we say, oh, this person has left me and gone. What has exactly left and what is exactly still here? So when there is death, what remains here and what leaves? What remains here we know, the body remains here. Very obvious. This verse points out what is it that leaves at the time of death. So when the Master acquires a body, he takes these, the six. Which are the six? The five senses: sight, hearing, touch, smell, and so on, and the mind. So at the time of leaving, it's the soul, the jiva, takes the senses and the mind from the body and attains to a new body. And then whatever new body is got, so a rebirth, punarjanma, means you do not have a new senses and new mind. You only have a new body. So the senses and the mind can be considered, let's say, like software, if you like. The body is the hardware. It's pretty much the senses are like your apps and the software. So it's like this. Now let's say you have an iPhone or a smartphone and it's gotten a little old and you decide, I'm going to get a new iPhone. And so you get a new iPhone. Now what happens to the apps that you have already bought? And if you are going to ditch this iPhone or give it away to someone or sell it on eBay, what you do is you first clear off all the your apps and software from it. But you have paid for those, so you can install the same software which you have already paid in the new device that you have got. And your device starts functioning fine. So the device is new, but what's running it, what's powering it, that software is carried over from your older device. Now you also know that when you delete your apps from a phone, the phone looks same. Outwardly, that's why it's software. It's very subtle. It doesn't change the phone in any way. But the phone then will no longer function the way it used to before. That's exactly how it is. That's why when a person dies, and then still we say this person has left us, something has definitely gone, but you cannot see it. It's just like an iPhone with apps also deleted and software which is gone. And therefore, when we take birth, now that we have taken birth, the mind that we have right now, the senses that we have all come from our earlier device. That's it sounds funny to be referring to the body as a device, but essentially that's essentially it. It's perishable. And the example that Krishna gives here is like a breeze. When a breeze blows, and then you have now the springtime, which will almost coming to an end though. There are flowers blooming in the garden. If you are lucky enough, there are lots of flowers in our garden here have been just eaten by rabbits. So if you are lucky to not have lots of rabbits around, the flowers may still survive. And when a breeze comes, the breeze carries. Okay? Sometimes you see you're standing and there's lots of flowers, and then you get that beautiful fragrance. Because the breeze carries those fragrance from those flowers. And yet, the flowers are just fine. You go there and you don't see that flowers have reduced in size or anything. So just as the breeze carries the subtle portion of the flower and takes it to a different place, the jiva carries the subtle portion of the body after death and carries it to a different place, into a new body. Verse number 9. Shrotram chakshusparshanancha rasanam ghranameva adhishthaya manaschayam vishayanupasevate. Presiding over the ears, the eyes, the organs of touch, taste and smell, and also the mind, he enjoys the sense objects. So we are able to experience the world around us only because we have the senses. Now when I say the sense of perception, although I'm pointing here, this is not really the sense of perception. I mean, normally we say, well, we see through the eyes, and normally we think, well, this is the eye. But yes, that's how we see it. But the sense of perception is not just, this is just a doorway, because all the mechanism that occurs inside the optic nerve. Now, if the optic nerve is damaged inside, this eye may be perfect, yet I won't be able to see. So the sense itself is not these doorways. So this is not my sense of hearing, but it's a door through which sound can go in. And so when it is said that after death the senses are carried, doesn't mean the doorways. You can see a person is dead, the ears, and so when we speak about donating organs, so when you say when you're donating eyes, you're not really donating a sense. What you're really donating is the hardware. So the person to whom this organ donation takes place, now that person has the sense of perception, but doesn't have the hardware through which that sense could operate. And so the organ donation means you are kind of giving your hardware to be fixed in that person, and then through that, the sense of perception of that person starts functioning. So I think that's important to remember. Donating eyes or donating other things, really, it's donating of hardware. Because the senses, my sense of perception will go with me after my death. I cannot donate my sense of perception. I can only, it's only my hardware that will go. So using these senses, we are able to experience the world. Now here is one philosophical question. Do I have the senses because there is a world for it to be experienced, or there is a world to be experienced because I want to see it? I don't know whether I made it clear. Let me say it again. Do I see the world because it is out there, or the world is there because I want to see it? These are two different things. And according to Vedanta, the world is there because I want to see it. It's my desire that produces the world. When there is no desire, there is no world. I mean, think about it this way. In deep sleep, there is no one has any desire in the state of deep sleep. There is no desire in deep sleep, there is nothing to see. We all see what we want. We all see what we are looking for. So I'll just tell you one little story and I'll stop. This story is about two friends who are walking in Times Square in New York. One of them was of a Native American, or American Indian if you like. So he and his friend, they were walking in this, as you know, Times Square is so busy, noisy, there's a lot going on there. And as they were walking along it, this Native American boy, he tells his friend, I'm hearing the sound of the cricket. It's a tiny little insect, as you know. And he said, I'm hearing the sound of that cricket. And this other friend says, what? I'm not able to hear anything. I'm just hearing all these cars moving by, people shouting. Where is that? He said, let's go. And so they kind of take a side street and then go to the backyard of a house there. And there under the bush, he finds one little cricket was making that sound. And this friend was amazed. He said, how could you hear that sound of that tiny little insect in the midst of the din and bustle of this busy street? And so again, they come back on the main street and start walking. And then this Native American friend, he says, well, I'll show you how. And so after they have walked a few steps, he takes a quarter from his pocket and just drops it. And then immediately lots of people who are rushing, everyone is in a hurry, and everyone kind of stops, pauses to see what's happening. Just the sound of a quarter fallen on a sidewalk. Everyone pauses. And then he tells his friend, we all find what we are looking for. So you see, it's not that all the time we are looking for a sound of a quarter when we are walking. But in a very subtle way, that's where our mind lies. And because of that, we are open to that sound. We have not yet become open to what being closer to nature means. The more we are able to open ourselves to the beauty of nature, the sound, the color, we will see things which many people will not be able to see. So when an artist or a photographer sees the sunrise or a sunset, they see something much more than the rest of us. So this is just one example to show that what we see outside is more an indication of who we are than about what is really out there. We see, so in some ways, the world we see is a mirror. We see ourselves in that mirror. If we find the world to be evil, selfish, angry, terrible, some of those seeds are in my own heart. That is why they get reflected to me from the world that I see. The world that Ramakrishna saw just filled with the bliss of the Divine Mother. Because that is what was there inside, and that got reflected to him from outside. So, whichever way we see things outside, whichever way we interpret our experiences, tells us more about our own selves than about what's out there. And that's the Vedantic approach, to see everything from a subjective standpoint. So when we see something, our normal tendency is to say, why is that thing that way? A spiritual approach to that would be not asking why is that thing that way, but asking why am I seeing it that way? Because if I can change my angle of vision, if I can change the filter on my mind, the world will change for me. We oftentimes make the mistake of trying to change the world around us without changing our own selves. It's so much more easier to change ourselves than to change the world. We can never succeed in changing the world fully. I mean, there have been great reformers and they've done great amount of good. But we see that it always goes in ups and downs. Great reformers come, depending on how powerful they are able to do some good to the world, so a little improvement occurs, and over time it goes down again. And then another reformer has to come, and then it goes down again. But if we can change ourselves, which is completely under our control, the world will change for us. So there is this story that we used to be told when we were children, was that one, just as children's stories are, that there was this king who developed an allergy for dust. And so he said, I'm going to cover my entire kingdom with leather or whatever was available there, but so that no dust will come. And then his advisor goes and says, it's so much easier, quicker, and more efficient to just start wearing shoes. So you just cover your own feet so that you are not in touch with dust, rather than trying to cover the entire kingdom with dust. So that's essentially it. If you want the world to be good, let us try to be good ourselves. The more goodness shines from our own heart, that will get reflected. We want to see more love in the world outside. Let's try to eliminate love or hatred from our own heart. The more love there is within us, the more love we will be able to discover. It's not that there is no love in the world, there is, but we are not able to see it. Just like that sound of that cricket, there's this one person who was sensitive to it, others weren't. So if we have this love in our heart, we will become sensitive to the presence of love outside. So that's an important thing to remember. So we stop here today on verse number 9. When we meet next time, we'll begin with verse 10. If you have any questions, thoughts, ideas on this, of what we have seen today? Yeah, Vikram.
So, Swamiji, as we want to transcend the material world to see our inner lightness, our inner light, does it also then help to simply declutter our lives and simplify our lives by actually reducing the number of physical material objects we have?
It definitely helps. There is no doubt about it. The simpler things become, even in terms of number, it's definitely better. That's why, I mean, even look at look at the modern gadgets in some ways. They are becoming more and more simple. The fewer the ports you have in your computer, the easier it is and the more efficient it becomes. Yeah, in fact, I remember years ago, one of the elderly monks who was our teacher in the monastic college, he made one remarkable statement, and he said, we are richer by what we can do without. So normally we think that wealth or richness means how many things I have. But the real sense of wealth would be what I can do without. The minimum my requirements are, the happier I am. I mean, why do people want wealth? They want to be happy. And if I can be happy by eliminating the clutter in my life, I don't need to add to the clutter, right? Yeah. Anything else? Any questions online?
Dominique, there's a question from Ralph. He says, may God realization in any way be considered subjective based upon the experience of an individual? Is it in any way objectively verifiable? And he furthers on, he says, an objection may arise that realization is subjective and unverifiable.
It is subjective because according to Vedanta, the subject alone exists. There are no objects. So that is the premise of the Gita, that there are no objects. And because there are no objects, it is subjective. It is verifiable. It is verifiable by the person who gets it. That's essentially it. It can't be shown to anybody because God is not an object.
I think the first verse you discussed, where it says that after reaching the supreme state, you will never return. We see that all the Swamijis who have realized they are back here to help us, or they gave lectures and everything. Mm-hmm. So what do you mean by not returning?
Okay, good question. So I said just now it's very subjective. So it's actually this question can be answered at many levels. So let me just begin by, let me give one answer and then another answer, because the one level is, yes, as soon as a person attains to God, that person doesn't evaporate. Only that person is still there. That's how you have seen enlightened beings living in the world. Now we need enlightened beings in the world, because if immediately after enlightenment, if people were to just vanish, then there would be nobody to teach, first of all. So that there are enlightened teachers shows that they do survive. From the perspective of karma, it is said that as long as the prarabdha karma, the karma that has given rise to the body of the enlightened being, as long as that karma lasts, this enlightened being will continue to live. And because this person is enlightened, that person will continue to do only good, because that person is incapable of doing anything harmful to anyone. Because if that tendency to harm anyone were present, this person could not have gotten enlightened. And we might say, well, why would a person continue to live after enlightenment? And the examples they sometimes give is, because in the ancient books they didn't have motor cars, so they give the example of a chariot. But we can use a car as an example also. So let's say in a car, the engine fails in a car. When the engine fails or engine stops functioning, there is nothing powering that car anymore, or one of the wheels comes out, the car will still go some distance. It won't immediately stop, right? And similarly, for an enlightened being, the form, sound, everything had disappeared, gone. That's gone. But the momentum through which the body and mind, the enlightened being were going, that momentum still remains for a while. And that's the period, we can see this enlightened being continue to teach and help other people. From a little different and higher perspective, what we can say is that only an enlightened being knows what happens to that enlightened being, right? So when we see an enlightened being teaching and so on, it is the viewpoint of the unenlightened seeing someone who is enlightened. The thing is this, that you do not have a first-hand knowledge of someone else's enlightenment. You only have a guess, a faith or a guess. A good guess, because a lot of times the Gita describes in the Sthita Prajna Lakshana, or the qualities of someone who has gone beyond the three gunas. So we see those characteristics described in the books, and we see those characteristics manifested in the life of someone, and then from that we draw the inference, well, this person must be enlightened because we see those characteristics in that person. So it's still an inference, a guess. Or it's faith, but you do not have a first-hand information about that person's enlightenment. And so your question of why that enlightened being still continues to live, ideally that question should be asked to an enlightened being, because the enlightened being, see, it's the problem with this is this. I'm trying to kind of find the right words for it. It's difficult to answer this question, partly because of the assumption we are making that there are in fact many beings, some of whom have become enlightened and the others have remained enlightened. This question comes based on that assumption. But this whole basic premise of the Gita is there are in fact not many beings. There is only one being. So, I don't want to complicate it too much, but think about it this way. Suppose you are asleep. You're asleep and you are dreaming. And in your dream, you are a spiritual seeker. And you are trying, and then in your dream, you meet an enlightened being who comes and teaches you. And following the teachings of that enlightened being, you become enlightened yourself. Okay? Now, in all of this scenario, who is the reality? If it is your dream, the enlightened being you saw is a part of your dream. And your being enlightened means you wake up and it's not like, oh, those enlightened beings showed me the way. Now let me go and meet that enlightened being because now I'm also enlightened. You're not going to meet anybody there because you are all that exists. Right? If you are the only person who exists, then after your enlightenment, you are not going to be able to meet other enlightened beings who got enlightened before you. Right? So where have they gone? Isn't that a question then? So I hope I've not made it more complicated, but what I just want to stress is that a lot of our questions are based on this assumption that there are already many beings and some of whom have gotten enlightened. And then we say, well, how does that person remain and so on. But the problem with this is there are really not many beings. There is only one being. And then the question, of course, is who is that one being? In fact, as I mentioned on other occasions, I asked this question to my Vedanta teacher years ago. Because when we were talking about everything being a dream and so on. And then I asked my teacher, whose dream is it? Because if it's my dream, then I can wake up and the dream is over. right? What if it is someone else's dream? If I'm a part of someone else's dream, I don't have any control over it. There's nothing I can do about it. That person has to wake up. So when we say this whole world is a dream, we always have to ask, whose dream? And then the answer is, every one of us has to think, it's your dream. Because only if it's your dream, it's under your control. And therefore, to the highest category of students in Vedanta, the teacher gives a different teaching. So when a student would go to a teacher, the teacher doesn't give, normally of course, nowadays we have this kind of a collective class, everyone is there and then we discuss. And some of these things will make sense, some of these things may not make sense immediately. And the reason is that not all of us are at the same level of understanding. And so in olden days, the teaching was always one-on-one. And so when the student would go to a teacher's place, the teacher would look at the student and say, okay, now in this stage of this student, I'm going to give this lesson which the student will understand. And so in the beginning, the teaching was pretty much what we all normally think about. Like there are many people, we all have to struggle to be spiritually free. Some of us succeed, some of us take more time, some of us become free earlier. So there is this assuming the presence of diversity and many people, which is fine. But as we evolve, as our perceptions become clearer, then a higher teaching is given. And that there is only one being. So this presence of many jivas is called Aneka Jivavada. And a higher teaching is Eka Jivavada. There is only one being, and you are that being. And think about it this way. When we speak about Brahman, the infinite being, the infinite is only one. There cannot be many infinites. So that infinite being somehow seems to have forgotten that I am infinite. Somehow that infinite being went to sleep and started dreaming this world and became a part in that dream. That's exactly what happens in our own dream. Let's say you're alone at home, there is nobody else, and you go to sleep and you start dreaming and you see yourself in that dream. Now that really the whole dream is your creation. Whole dream is come from your mind. In some sense, you are your dream because there is nothing else. You have created the whole thing. You are your dream. But in the dream, you are also seeing yourself. So you are your dream and you have also made yourself a little part in that dream. So exactly in the same way, this Brahman, this one being fell asleep, started dreaming this dream of the world. And in that dream of the world became yourself. And therefore now you have to wake up and discover that only you existed. Nobody else other than you existed. If you find that's a scary thought, that you are the only one existing in the world, it means that the time has not yet come for you to start thinking in terms of only one being. It means that for some time, it's helpful to think about that there are many beings in the world, that we are all struggling, that some of us may attain to that truth faster or earlier. And those who attain to the truth earlier will come and help us. And then with their help, we will attain it. Hold on to that idea. But don't think that that's the ultimate truth. Because as we evolve, as our clarity improves, we will realize or we will see the world, we will understand the world in a different way. Is that more or less all right? I hope I'm not confused it further, but I've tried to. It's a pretty complex in some ways, but if we think about it calmly, it may not appear to be that complex. Okay?
It's just following question what he asked. Maharaj, my understanding is that enlightenment will come when you burn all your karma. Because detachment means you are going to attach with something if karma is still there. So how a person can be enlightened if the karma is still there?
That's why the Gita says that just as fire burns fuel and everything to ashes, the light of knowledge burns all karma to ashes. So either it's the knowledge that we are this eternal being, by the direct experience, not just cerebral knowledge, experience that we are the spirit, that karma can be burnt. It can be burned through God's grace, the path of devotion. It can be burnt, and there is a path of Raja Yoga, there is a path of Karma Yoga. So through practice of any of these yogas, either singly or jointly, there are different ways that our attachment will be lessened and these karmas will be burnt. So there are many different ways of doing it. You cannot burn the karma one by one. At some point you just have to make a bonfire, a campfire. And only knowledge can do that. That's the idea. Because if the problem is ignorance, the solution can only be knowledge. That's the thing. Okay, so we stop here today, and when we meet next week, we will begin with verse number 10. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So Sunday, Antar Yoga, as we do every month, with prayer, music, reading by members, and then we'll have soup for everyone and a birthday celebration for everyone born in the month of June. So you're all welcome on Sunday for the Antar Yoga. Next Wednesday, of course, we will continue with the study of the Gita, and on Tuesday and Saturday, our Arati and meditation will also continue. So you're welcome for all of these programs. Let's conclude with a prayer now on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.